horrifying scenes. Just a door separates them from the gunman. That's more of the Philadelphia shooting caught on camera. The bullets hitting 3 of the victims, all very lucky to be alive tonight. Now to Washington, under battle over banning assault weapons. Senator Harry Reid says he doesn't have the votes to pass the bill. Well, we've asked all the senators if they support Senator Feinstein's proposed ban or not. The numbers aren't official, but they give an interesting insight. We now have 30 senators who have told us they are supportive of the bill. 42 have told us that they are opposed to it. 21 have given us no response, and 7 senators have given us no position. And as I did the other night, I'm going to read out the additional names who are opposed to this, and those who've given us no response, and those who have no position. So these are the senators we've added to a list of opposing any ban on assault weapons. Senators Barrasso, Blunt, Collins, Cornyn, Moran, Pryor, Tester, Thune. The senators who've given us no response whatsoever, despite repeated calls over 3 days: Bennett, Cantwell, Chambliss, Corker, Fisher, Heinrich, Heller, Johnson, Kirk, McCaskill, McConnell, Merkley, Paul, Portman, Scott, Sessions, Shaheen, Toomey, Udall, and another Udall, Vitter. And those who've given us no position with their explanations, which are ridiculous: Nelson, undecided; Wyden, did not respond; Warner, no comment; Reid, Harry Reid, the leader, doesn't want to participate. Well, of course he doesn't. Hagan has not declared a position. Baldwin hasn't declared a position. And Kaine hasn't declared a position. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? You're a senator of the United States, and it's about an assault weapons ban which could save Americans' lives, and you can't declare a position, or you haven't got a comment, or you can't bring yourself to even respond to us. Shame on you, senators, and I'm going to keep asking you until I get answers. Anyway, there's a renewed effort tonight to make gun dealers and manufacturers liable if, because of their fault, someone is injured. But they're protected thanks to a gun shield bill passed by Congress in 2005. California Congressman Adam Schiff is hoping to reverse that with his new proposal. He joins me now, along with Richard Feldman, who's a former NRA operative and now president of the Independent Firearms Owners Association. Welcome to you both. Turn to Richard Feldman, former NRA operative. You were a lobbyist for the NRA. You know Wayne LaPierre well and how they work as an organisation. Only today we hear that the NRA is suing New York State over the new gun control law, actually taking legal action to try and prevent them bringing in laws which make New York State safer from gun violence. What is your reaction to that?
Well, Piers, in this country, laws have to abide by the Constitution of the state that they're enacted in, as well as under the federal Constitution. And if one has a cause of action, the place to settle those concerns are in the courts. That's not just our system, that's the British system as well. And I'm sure you're aware of that. That's why we settle those debates in the courts and not out on the street.
Piers, you know, there's a terrible irony here that the NRA is going after the state of New York for passing gun laws. They want to use the courts to try to protect themselves, but at the same time they push this law to immunize them for being held accountable by others. So They want to use the courts to protect themselves, but they don't want consumers, they don't want the public, they don't want cities to be able to use the courts to hold negligent dealers and sellers responsible.
Mr. Feldman, you go on about freedom. It's a great word that the NRA tosses around as the excuse for doing all this. And I say NRA leadership.
We Americans talk about freedom quite a bit.
Well, you don't have to be quite so jingoistic, do you? Or do you?
Well, I would hope the British folks talk about it as much. After all, you know, we learned about so many of these freedoms from the British people. Indeed, when you go on, as you have over the last few months, beating up on the American people and our love of the firearm issue, thank God we had guns, because twice in the last 100 years, we saved the British people because the Americans had the guns to come to your aid and your help when you needed ours. And we were there. If we didn't have the guns, who would you have turned to?
Wow, thank God for you. Where was Winston Churchill when all this was going on?
Just say thank you would be enough to the American people.
You know what?
Mr.
Feldman, you're obviously trying to be deliberately offensive. You are exactly how I imagined an NRA lobbyist to be.
I'm trying to speak the truth.
You're not speaking the truth. You're making vacuous, jingoistic points.
That's okay. We have a free society.
As you well know, let's talk about this freedom. Let's talk about this freedom. How many existing gun control laws are there in America? Do you know?
I've heard about 20,000.
Mm-hmm. But what about the...
And do you know how many weapons, individual types of weapons, guns, would still be available to the American people if every single one of Senator Feinstein's proposals were brought into law? Do you know how many?
You know, Piers,
do you know
missed
how many?
the point.
Do you know how
And
many?
When I was at the White House with the Vice President,
Do you know an answer or not?
back in January, if you focus on the gun, you miss the opportunity to zero in on the problem, which is never the gun per se, but always in whose hands are the guns.
How many people?
And when you ask
how many people? Mr. Feldman,
Piers,
I've heard this
we're in
guff.
agreement in this
I've
country.
heard this guff long enough. It's not the gun, it's the people. Right? You quoted
Well,
Britain earlier in a derogatory.
truth is truth.
You quoted my country in a derogatory way earlier. Let me quote it back at you. We have about 40 gun murders a year in Britain. You know why? We don't have any guns. We have a tiny, tiny
I know you
fraction
don't have
of
any guns. That's my point.
Well, that's why we
What
have
would
no gun
happen?
murders, Mr. Feldman.
Mr. Feldman, when you're talking about freedom, the freedom to have and bear guns, what about the freedom of people to send their kids to school without being shot? What about the freedom of those children to get an education without being shot? Why are we ignoring the freedom of American people to go about their lives and not be the victims of extraordinary gun violence?
You know,
and I have to say, you know, this continual argument that we
Congressman,
hear that if we just had more guns, we'd be safer. We've got 300 million guns in this country. If that were the measure
it's
of
not the number
safety,
of guns.
then, well, it's, at some point it is the measure of guns. Because if you look at
It's
how
in
many guns
whose
we have per
hands are the
capita,
guns?
we lead the world in per capita guns. We also lead the world in per capita gun violence. There is a correlation here. And,
Well,
you know,
that's not
frankly,
exactly
I
true,
think we
but-
ought to be fighting just as vigorously for the freedom to live our lives unmolested, uninjured by gun violence, as fiercely protecting the right of people to have guns.
Here.
You
I totally
know, when
agree.
you're in danger, you don't want an unarmed security guard to show up an hour later. You want the tactical police department to show up right then and there.
Well, what I
When
don't want,
trouble
I
is
don't
nearby,
want someone
a gun
showing
is a
up. I don't want
tool.
someone showing up
It
to
can
my
save
children's
your
school
life.
with an assault weapon. And when the police are called in, I don't want the police outgunned by someone with an assault weapon. I would like, frankly, the police to be better armed than the civilians out on the street or bad guys that get a hold of military-style weapons with extended clips that are only good for one thing, and that is killing people very rapidly. I mean, why do you need an extended clip? Do you hunt with an extended clip? Does anyone hunt with an assault weapon with an extended clip? Is that what you would use for protection in your home? It's crazy.
You're
it's
conflating
crazy.
issues,
And there's no
and you know
Second
it,
Amendment
Congressman.
right to an assault weapon or a flamethrower or a tank or an F-16. There's nothing that precludes us from putting responsible restrictions. It doesn't interfere with sport or hunting or the ability to protect your family. But what it may mean is it may mean fewer kids get killed at their elementary school, or people that go to the local movie theater to watch a movie can actually survive and leave the theater intact. And to me, that's worth it.
Congressman, your failure to zero in on the problem is the problem in this country. You want to talk around the problem. You want to use language that sounds like the problem. But the relationship between gun control and crime control is very tenuous at best. We all want to keep guns out of the hands of those who misuse them. If we focus our efforts
Mr.
in
Feldman,
Washington
for the people
on the
that
problem,
were waiting in
we
line,
can do something
for the
about the
constituents
problem.
that were waiting in line to see my colleague Gabby
And if
Giffords,
we ignore the problem,
if that
nothing will happen.
If that killer didn't have an extended clip, some of those kids, some of those people who were in line would have survived.
Congressman, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chris.
Mr. Feldman, thank you very much. Next.